Hi guys, Adam McCubbin here. Super excited to share with you this episode today. I hope you get out as much information as I did doing this interview. A lot of preparation, effort, and work goes into each episode, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and subscribe to this episode. Plus, if you want to leave a comment below, ask any questions, I'd be more than happy to get back to you. Just a quick announcement, this show is now brought to you by MYPROTEIN. MYPROTEIN is an online company that sells supplements, training apparel, and equipment. It's a company that I've used for several years and highly recommend their products. I'll put a link to the website below, plus a 25% discount code if you'd like to purchase products from there. And without further ado, here's the episode. Okay, today we've got Jackson Litchfield here. He's a friend and a previous colleague. We used to work a long time ago together back in the Fitness First days in QV. So welcome, Jackson, to the podcast today.
Thanks, Cabo. It's good to be here in a fantastic living environment you've got yourself here. It's good to be in there.
Yeah, so before we get started, can you just give us just a brief snapshot for people who might not know who Jackson is and what you're all about? And can you just tell them, also the listeners, what you're currently sort of focused on with your work as well?
Brilliant. Yeah, fantastic question. So basically, grew up in a sporting culture, which meant that I was basically training 6 days a week for football, and that included training as well as strength training. And then I kind of got to the end of college and, chased up the academia route. And so I actually got accepted to architecture, but then decided to defer for 6 months. And whilst I was playing footy and getting paid for it, seemed like a nice lifestyle. But basically the health and fitness industry is what really grabbed me. And, at that point of time, it came down to a case of, really just kind of being aware of what I'm passionate about, which made me switch. So I didn't go back to uni, which was good. And I did my basic certificate 3 and 4. And literally the day that I finished, I walked straight into the city and had a bit of a walk around. And I found QV, which is actually when I met you. So yeah, so it was probably a big call early on in my life to switch and honour my passions, which was good. And then I took a big risk to go to the city because I was just a little bit out there. And from that day on, 11 years ago, I've just constantly, refined everything that I could and studied as much as I could just to offer value for my clients. And over the last 11 years, I would say I've probably travelled to a lot of countries to learn from probably the best that there are about how to implement strategy, psychology, and just do what I really care about, which is basically adding value and trying to sort of help people step into the best version of themselves. And, that comes down to nutrition, movement, functional medicine, and all these kind of things that add up. But quite simply put, just a man that's trying to add value and get people to reach their full potential with health. I guess that would be the overall summary. Yeah,
it's a good obviously philosophy, and you can it comes through in your social media. You can see that you're obviously passionate about what you do. How do you think you first tapped into that? Like what was the thing that initially just clicked and you said, okay, I got into architecture, I'm studying this, but then you decided, okay, this isn't for me. This is what I sort of change. This is what I want to do. What do you think was there someone, not necessarily in the industry of health and fitness, but was there some sort of pivotal moment that you thought, shit, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, exactly. So what that was, when you take 6 months off, it's actually quite interesting because you spend a lot of time alone. So, I was getting paid to play football, and it wasn't that much, but it was just enough to sort of cover my basic costs. So at which point you spend a fair bit of time on your own. And I think that's, it's an incredibly valuable thing to do, especially when you finish school. You got 19 years of school.
Yeah.
And then, you go straight into uni. That's like the quintessential flow. And for some reason, I'm just like, at the time, most people said, even my mum, was trying to force me to go back and study. But, I just literally was living week to week, and I spent 6 months. I was, I was down the beach, I was training, and then I don't know, there's something with solitude that reveals a little bit more truths about yourself.
Yeah.
And what that led to was just asking different questions. It's like, how do I want to spend my days?
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's not that I was fed up with the study. It was more like when you spend 6 months literally on your own every day, you kind of really get a good fundamental understanding of who you are and what you kind of want to contribute. And then it was quite clear at the end of it that I couldn't go back. And that was the first part, which was a little bit scary because obviously I worked so hard in school. And then it kind of left me with, well, you know, what do I want to do? And, you know, when you play football, you're around like physios and nutritionists, and they seem like really cool people. You know, not only were they healthy, they looked 10 years younger than they were. And all these variables were like, you know, I want some of that, you know, I want to look good, I want to feel good, I want to communicate. And initially I wanted to work with athletes, which kind of took a stronghold on me.
Yeah.
And I went down that path with education and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think that was probably it. Just seeing people. Was
there someone specific that you sort of modeled yourself on? Was there someone, say, at the football club or a coach that you saw and you're like, this guy's fit, he's doing what I want to do? There was.
And it was funny because it came in the form of a sports psychologist. So there was a guy called Bruce Davies, and he worked with the Collingwood Magpies. I don't know if those that live in Australia would know that team. Yeah. And that's a professional AFL team. And he kind of like mentored the TAC Cup team that I was in. And he just basically destroyed my ego. So when you're young and you play and you're a kid, you know, you're good and people tell you you're good and you live and breathe off that. You know, you love that external validation. And this guy kind of come in and, you know, not only did he's a sports psychologist, but he also taught some fundamental lessons about life, you know, like, you know, how you look after your teammates, how you pack your gym bag, all these kinds of things that added up, right? And, you know, when you play football and you're a decent player, you think that that's it, it's enough, but not even close. So he kind of humbled us a bit, and he kind of like showed me what it meant to be a good person first, and then secondly, you know, you could play football, you can do what you want. So I guess a guy called Bruce Davies was, you know, he was a sports psychologist, and I mean, he really just made me think of certain things, you know. And probably the other lesson that I learned from him was that you know, it wasn't a case of doing stuff to get things. He was very much about focusing on who you are. And basically, if you can tap in and really own who you are, naturally your behavior will follow. So he did a lot for my personal psychology, because I don't know about most of you guys, but at 19, you seem to get lost a little bit, right? Because you start to, you know, have to choose your adult career. And he helped me choose. And he helped me choose because he helped me. And then I also wanted to be, again, somewhere along that lines of like some kind of a health leader that inspires change, whether it was behavioral or body composition or whatever. But there was something beautiful in that literally changed the trajectory of how I treated people, the internal dialogue I had with myself, and pretty much everything else that flowed on from that, which is being a good person. Yeah,
well, that's something I noticed about you, and I'm obviously quite a few years older than you, but I think when you initially started, you did sort of had a level of maturity about you. I mean, obviously we did some stupid things at QV, and
which we don't regret, of course.
No, of course not. But at the same token, you could switch that on, and I think obviously modeling yourself off, whether it was him or someone else, has been good for you. Where did you get that initial work ethic? Because it's something from an outsider I've seen you work before. And just through our mutual friends as well, I know how much you work and study and pursue your career. Where do you think that stems from for you?
Yeah, also a great question. And the clear answer for me is my clients. So, you know, we worked in the same place, and funnily enough, we were below Deloitte's, I can't remember the law firm's name, but BHB Billiton. So, you know, on the theme of, you know, so we would take clients on and, you know, we would obviously offer them value in terms of nutrition, movement, and some kind of lifestyle behavioral change. But one thing I noticed is, you know, a lot of my clients taught me some really good lessons. And, you know, for instance, I would learn about people's life, and I would look at what kind of questions do they ask, what kind of like existence do they have. And for me, it was like, you know, naturally we all gravitate towards certain people. And then funnily enough, I started attracting clients that were, you know, doing 12, 14-hour days. And I started to kind of like, I guess, when you share space with someone, you can't help but be influenced. Jim Rohn says you're the sum of the 5 people you spent the most time with. Mm-hmm. And my 5 top clients were guys that worked hard. So I probably started to associate these kind of behaviors with success. And that's only one variable when you look at time spent in doing what you do. That's a big variable, because obviously, if you're working hard, you're learning faster and you're immersing yourself in that. But yeah, again, just going back to the quick answer, it was like just watching my clients and the ones that I believed were really sort of successful with their family, with their body, with their career. They all worked hard. Yeah. So I drew the same conclusion. If I want a life like that, it probably means I should do the same. And that's exactly what eventuated. I mean, I watched these guys, I learned from them, I asked them questions, and probably they taught me as much as I taught them. Right?
Yeah. And I think that's a great answer. I've had Heath Williams, he's an osteopath in Melbourne, and I asked him a sort of similar question. He gave me that answer. He said he learnt off every client who walks through the door. Yeah. And he's an experienced practitioner who's been in practice for 15, 20 years. But for him to say to me, when he gets people in, he's trying to learn as much about them. And I think that's a way that I guess you can establish connection. Is that what you found, that you can connect with people on that level?
So, I'm a curious by nature, and, it's much like yourself. So you kind of look at what variables make a good life. Choosing a career is one of them. And if you don't know, there's so many versions of these, but if you Google the Wheel of Life, you might get some slightly different interpretations, but generally the theme is the same. And you got your family life, you've got your spirituality, you've got your career, you've got your finances, all these things that, there's a lot more to it, but you probably should go check, like family and social life. So you look at the Wheel of Life and, there's so many measures of success out there. It's like, which ones are good? And this is probably the biggest reference point I could find. So when you look at the Wheel of Life and, you start to get balanced in all of them, and, you start to probably invest time and energy into, because basically if you don't plant, you reap what you sow. Yeah. So even when it comes to, your relationship with, your spouse, your career, yourself, like, your body and your health. Yeah. So you have to really make sure you've got a broad spectrum, sort of investing your time in all these kind of variables. So yeah, that was it. They kind of like had that. I didn't know it was called the Wheel of Life. Yeah.
But can you just I'm just going to interrupt. Just to explain for people that might not have encountered it before, the Wheel of Life, what it should look like and what it basically is. It's hard to...
I should probably rush through that one. That's right. So I can give you a little bit more on that. Just Google it. There's different versions of it, and probably some of them resonate more with you than others, but just find the Wheel of Life that kind of makes sense, because there are a few interpretations of. Yeah,
and what you're looking for with that.
Yeah, so there's all these categories, right? And then you basically rate yourself out of 10. And there's I think there's 8. And basically you get a number. And in theory, as cliche as it is, if you happen to get them all where you want, it seems like it's a big influence on, well-being and, identity and kind of like, I wouldn't say complete life because there's probably no such thing, but, productivity and growth and probably all the values that you want to live by, they're kind of honored. And sometimes you need something really obvious in front of you to introduce you to that. So basically you answer it and you want them to all be balanced. And if they're not balanced, then, you start to look at what's not balanced, and then you could probably ask the fundamental question of maybe why is it? And then I think I'd highly suggest if it's not balanced or you're lacking in one sort of quadrant, what you could probably do, and I think the best one is to do is action. So you should follow up with a few behaviors that might level that one out, and just kind of watch what it does to your spiritual well-being and your productivity.
So for example, if you're like a successful CEO of a company, but you've neglected your health.
Which is typical. Yeah, exactly.
And you look at the wheel and you're like, he's got family, he's got everything, and it's all up in the different categories, and then you'll see whether it's health. And then it could be the other way around, someone who's invested obviously a lot in their health, but then
then they haven't developed their career or so and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a delicate balance of it all, and I think fundamentally, if you look at the whole priority, it should fall in line with, I love this model. And again, I just want to introduce another concept. It's called the 6 human needs. Mm-hmm. And I would probably suggest you look that up, because if you answer that first and understand what you value more, because your values dictate what you want from life.
Yeah.
So I'd probably explore the 6 human needs first, have a look at them, see what you kind of gravitate towards, find your top 2 needs, and then go to the wheel of life. And then you can really get an understanding, a step back snapshot view of, where you invest your time and what it leads to. But yeah, like you said, you don't want, you want a nice relationship with your family, your spouse, your health. And I think that if you drop the ball somewhere, it makes you extremely vulnerable in some areas. And, again, people value different things, and that's fine. But just knowing what you value and then how to kind of implement behavioral patterns to sort of honor that, I think that's where it comes. And I guess that's probably, I don't know how often I'm a big fan of this, and I'm sure you're the same. You sit down at the end of the week or every night and you have a look and you kind of just perceive what your week was like, and you kind of feel like, okay, what was good about it, what wasn't so great, and what could I do better? So you start to ask these questions, and then it reveals some truths that about yourself. And then it's like how would I explain it? It's like, when you train and you work out and you build muscle, I think you need to do the same with your psychology. And I think it's the same. Like you need to ask these questions, and you need to train certain things and also invest your time in certain areas. So I think, overall it comes down to just understanding, what makes a good life and what variables you need to plug in, and then sort of going from there.
Yeah. And then I guess it comes back to awareness and obviously specificity to that person, because what you might perceive as fit and healthy might be completely different to someone else.
Yeah.
And is this something that you would go through? Now, obviously, it's something that has been a sort of evolutionary process in your self-development, but is this something that you would do with a client, and pending obviously if they're receptive to it, but do you talk about this with your coaching?
Absolutely. Not so much the wheel of life, because I think I can get more of an understanding, or I do get more of an understanding when it comes down to the human needs. I learned this from Tony Robbins, but I think I can't remember where he learned it from, but basically the top human needs: certainty, uncertainty, significance, love and connection, growth and contribution.
Yeah.
So basically you want to sort of prioritize those needs. And once I've got an idea of what that client values, it does allow me to coach better. So for instance, if I have someone that values certainty, I know that, they need some strict framework that they need to follow, because I know that their personality, they eat that up.
Yeah.
Now, if I give someone that values certainty, uncertainty, I don't show them the next 4 weeks of progressions and, micro progressions and variables we're going to switch, that might make them feel a little bit uneasy. They want to know the process and the variables and all these kind of small tweaks that we're doing and percentages. That's someone that values certainty. Now, uncertainty they're kind of fun to work with, because it's like, they kind of want every session to be different. And then almost for them, you almost have to have a little bit of a conversation and say, you can't learn German and French at the same time. We're going to have to run a body comp protocol. It's going to look like this, but I will change more things in them. Because, when you look at a program, what's the best program? Well, it's the one that works for the person. So if you just try and, from my experience, you just try and, you take a client, you don't really pay respects to who they are, and you just write them a program, I'm not convinced you can get the most from them. But when you start to understand who they are and what they value, it's easier for me to sort of plan for them. So even though by the textbook, I might, I should theoretically give them a phase for, say, 4 weeks, I might, because I know their personality, switch it every 2, but subtly.
Yeah.
And that will, that honors that person's value of uncertainty.
Yeah. And I guess that's something that you've picked up after doing this for 11 years, you can see that when you speak to someone, you can pick up, the words and phrases they might use. But is there something specific that you would sit down, just say I gave you a client today and said this person wants to be in this position in 6 months' time?
Yeah.
Is there a framework or structured thing, or do you just do it based on, I guess, your motivational sort of interviewing when you speak to them and gauge that?
So
I guess
more like a questionnaire and stuff like that.
Is there anything specific?
No, when it comes to the human needs, not so much. It's more like you said, interviewing really so in depth, working out, when you start to take a history over a timeline, you look at, who they, what they've kind of done over the timeline and their interpretation of it. And then you also, I'm really big on probing on limiting factors. So, I believe that, we all have humongous potential, but sometimes it comes down to understanding how to kind of plug that in. And maybe that they've been running east looking for the sunset for too long. So you need to get the strategy right. And that strategy needs to be relevant to the person, which means that, when you take the history and you look at their behavior and then you ask them to, explain to me, what do you think happened? Often, I don't really say much when I interview people. It's more so a conversation with themselves, and they probably start to realize their tendencies and traits and their perceptions and how they've kind of viewed their whole transformation over their whole lifetime. We go back to, was their mother breastfed or not, how they were as a kid, injuries, sports history, all these kind of things. And once you find out what they, if they tell you their story, and then you explore the intention behind their behaviors, it starts to reveal their needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
But from my end, you do get a structured view on it. And, I kind of, again, I've done several of Tony Robbins' workshops and whatnot. They kind of teach you how to recognize them, but they'll show up in stories and just questions that go beyond, if you ask someone what happened and why do you think that was, and then keep pressing, you'll get the truth behind everything.
Yeah. And I think that's the key. And what you just said before comes down to listening and hearing what they've got to say. I think a lot of times people get lost in thinking that they need someone to give them the answer.
Yeah.
And what you just spoke about then is a lot of times them just hearing themselves talk, you can almost just lead them to the answer themselves.
They know the answer. You'll never know the answer because it's always changing, but probably they do know the answer and they'll tell you. But also I find, when you sit down with a client and you interview them, I think it's really important to make a judgment-free, expectation-free zone. So, 11 years now of working on an immersion levels with a lot of people, you start to see things and I guess traits that stop people from, tapping into their full potential. And for me, there's two things that I think is the biggest when it comes to behavioral change and implementing the right strategies, which we can probably talk about in a minute. But it's more like judgments of themselves and expectations. So people, if you just look at Instagram now, you look at men's health magazines, there's Johnny got this in 4 weeks. So, the guy does the program, 4 weeks later, he doesn't look like Johnny and he wonders, is there something wrong with me and whatever. So for me, the biggest thing I like to do is tear down judgments, reference points and expectations. And then we're left with the fundamental, you got to tell the truth of where you are. Otherwise you're never going to get anywhere because you don't know your true starting point. So we find out where they are. We dismantle any expectations or attachment to outcomes, and we work on what they're going to do and how they're going to show up today in that moment. And then you kind of work from there. But I think, when you work with people and you create that judgment-free, expectation-free environment, naturally they're more compliant anyway. Because I don't know when you're a kid, but when your mum says don't do something, you wait until she's not looking and you do it because you want to test what it is. I don't think that part of humans are ever, it's never going to die, and I think it's the same thing, no one likes being told what to do. People like, doing what they feel. And then if you tell them, even if they weren't going to do it and you told them not to do it, they'll probably still do it anyway, So it's not a case of don't do that, don't do this. I very rarely say don't do anything. It's more like, let's explore, who you want to be and who you are right now. And then, what does that person behave like? And then there's no expectation. It's just them in a free-flowing state of, who they are and who they want to be. Yeah. The actual doing part is obsolete because it follows.
Yeah. And is there obviously there's a lot of information that you're relaying to the client. How do you find to get that across to your client? Do you give them books? Obviously it's highly dependent on the individual because one person might need something else. How do you get that across? Is it just more verbal, you coaching them through that, or do you give them sort of external maybe courses, or here's a book, or here's a
You're talking about the overall kind of thing, or just the psychology part?
Well, more so the psychology. I guess that's what we're speaking about now. So more specifically on not necessarily program design or nutritional strategies, more on that psychology.
On the behavioural change.
Yeah, because I think
it's a massive part of what I do.
Yeah.
Because look, you take a client on, just to give, if anyone's obviously not a PT, you write a nutritional program based off all the variables that they've given you, their body composition, their goals and whatnot, and the foods they like, don't like, food intolerances. And then you'll kind of create a movement plan, which generally speaking, and then maybe a vitamin or mineral plans, whether you do blood tests or not. So generally the way I work is, I structure nutrition, we look at movement, and then we look at, supplements and blood work if needed, if there's some suspecting underlying thing. So for people to step into that, it's quite overwhelming. So the key variables, to say the strategy is sorted, how do you then get the client to, adhere to everything? Because chances are, change and significant change in behavior is just one of those things that has constantly, driven me to, research and read every day, because that's where the true magic, I believe, is. And what we want to do is, if I was to put it simply, I believe there's two types of motivation. There's pushing motivation and there's pulling motivation. So I'll explain. Most people, they want to get a little bit leaner. So what they do is they get the strategy like I lay out for them, and they're like, okay, great. So now what all I've got to do is I've got to train 4 times a week. I've got to structure my meals like that. I'm going to do my blood work and potentially, work on whatever needs to be addressed. And then I will look how I want to look. But I'm not so sure that works, because that's doing stuff to get something. And the other way is that's pushing motivation, and then there's pulling. So what I like to do at the start is, basically take a client, just say the strategy is there, and if I was to explain this to you, for instance, if you knew in, say, let's say a typical transformation, 12 weeks, if you knew and believed, with every sort of ounce of cells in your body, that you were going to get that result. So what we do is we create certainty. We create this vision, and there's different means to really instill that. But we really probe deep into Simon Sinek's really good on this, finding your why. So we do a lot of work on the why, and why do they want it, and what does it look like? What does it feel like? What kind of person are you? So we create this vision, and it's so compelling that it's almost like they've already got it. So they're certain that that's the outcome, right? So that's basically what we create. And then so the vision is so compelling, naturally the behavioral patterns will then flow. And then you'll kind of do all the necessary stuff, like, you're going to show up to training, but you'll show up to training. You execute your food, and you'll start to develop a stronger neuro association to what you're doing, because you'll see it all as empowering towards your vision, as opposed to doing stuff to get something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
Also just tapping back on that last point, if you knew in 12 weeks you're going to get the result, and temptation showed up, it's pretty easy to object and go, no, because I know this is coming in 12 weeks, right? That's the difference with a client that you can instill certainty with. In 12 weeks, no, I'm not going to bother, because I know in 12 weeks it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, just say on the flip side, if from what I used to do, if I don't spend time in that kind of getting my client in that kind of state, they're not really sure, right? Because a lot of people haven't really transformed their body before, or they're aiming for something that they've never had. So if I detect some kind of I'm not sure I'm going to get it, or some uncertainty, or, is it really going to happen? And then what happens in that 12-week phase, if one of their friends says, hey, let's go out, and they're like, well, do I compromise my stuff? Well, I'm not really sure if I'm going to get it anyway, right? So they're more likely, more likely to sabotage the regime. So I try to get, if I was to put my success down to anything, it's from the start instilling certainty and faith in them, and then also trying to get them to trust themselves that they're going to get the result, even though they might never have seen it in their life before. They most likely will follow through and not compromise.
Yeah.
By like free will, not because they have to or they're following rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the whole getting them certain and believing that it's actually going to happen is the most important thing.
Yeah. And that obviously comes back to confidence as well, giving them confidence. And would you set them like, say, a smaller target along the way so you're building that sense of certainty and confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I do things with clients like, I get them to journal. I'm a big fan of this. So every night I journal my thoughts and behaviors and it goes from there. There's two things actually. Journaling is fantastic. At the end of the day, you can sort of recap what's going on and sort of reiterate what you're trying to achieve. Or there's something I learned, from Tony Robbins, which I think everyone should try. It's called priming. So you wake up in the morning, you got 9 minutes. And the first 3 minutes, and now I usually put loud music on when I do this, but it's up to you. You can do it in silence, whatever. So I feel sorry for my neighbors. But so 3 minutes is just grateful, right? You sit there and, what you appreciates. So I spend 3 minutes every day. Just being grateful for my body, no matter where it is.
Are you in bed? Are you sitting down?
I'm a big believer that physiology changes psychology. So I'm literally jumping up and down. There's music in my ears and it's loud and it's like 4:50, 5 a.m. And I'm jumping and I'm moving.
What specific song?
I
do you have a favorite?
Like Melbourne House. So it's if you don't like house, it's quite irritating. But for me, it's like just really big beats with a nice tempo. Because I just love that. And it's either that or, funnily enough, I don't know how this happened, but it's either that or either classical music. It's one of the two. But for some reason, I gravitate towards that. So the first 3 minutes, I'm jumping up and down. I'm grateful for my body. I'm grateful for who I am, my parents, my family, pretty much everything. And then the next 3 minutes, I'm still jumping. But this is where I go silent and I clear all my thoughts. It's called the Zen mind, whatever you want to call it, which means an empty mind. So I just empty my mind and use somatic breathing. So I just breathe and just reset everything. And then the last 3 minutes is what I want to visualize, what I want to create. And I get my clients to do versions of that. Very few of them jump up and down to house music, but they have their own version, whatever it is, whether they write it or not. So that 9 minutes, you wake up and, you suddenly become really clear on, who you are and what you want to give, that it kind of sets up everything else. So if you look at, probably to answer your question better now that I've thought about it, priming is a big part for me and my clients, because when they do it, it completely in the morning, for some reason, I find that we're very receptive to ideas and things. You ever found that there's a problem and you sleep on it and you wake up with a solution? Same principle. What you feed your mind in the morning, do you get up in the morning and just look at social media and the news? Well, you can do that if you want, but good luck. I don't know where that's going to end. The world's a horrible place, whatever, because that's what sells in the media. So my priming strategy, it's not mine, I ripped it off from Tony Robbins, but bless the man, he taught me that, and I teach clients that. And, like I said before about the certainty, if you know you're going to get something, it's so much easier to follow through because you just know, and you only know because you've created certainty for yourself. And I believe that's what priming does.
And just coming full circle around, we spoke about obviously the priming in the morning, but then also speaking about journaling. What do you find you get from that? But not only you, what do your clients expect to get from that?
Okay, this is a fantastic question. So one of the biggest issues I think in the world right now is stress. It's stress is good and bad. Depends your interpretation of it, right? You got media, you got career, you've got expectations. Some people have families and whatnot. So basically, I like meditation before you journal. So if you just breathe and come into the present moment, I find that, when you teach people or show them how to kind of meditate, probably, these really, your truths start to show up, you know what I mean? And you start to go, okay, that's there. And I'm a big believer in self-exploration. So when you sit there and you meditate and you pay attention to the now and the moment, that alone reduces stress. So just say the absence of stress, you start to reveal, like, you look at the subconscious mind, all these thoughts that, you've tucked away start to show up. And then you can address them. And then the second part of that is, because we all have stress and fears and whatnot, that's never going to go away. It's what we do with it. And then I just get them to write it down. Because I don't know about you, but, there was times in my life where I've been anxious about, things that are going to go on, and, the uncertainty of, growing up in your 20s, you're trying to develop yourself into some kind of professional, and there's all these pressures, socially, economic and whatnot. But when you write them down, actually, they seem a lot less relevant. Like, you have these thoughts in your head, and, and like I said, the truthful ones, the ones that, maybe have been stopping you from progressing for many years. And I find that hitting them head on is the best way to deal with it. And then the second best way is to write them out. There's something about writing those thoughts out and looking at them. You kind of laugh.
Well, you externalize it a little bit.
Yeah, and you kind of laugh like, oh my God, that's so stupid. Like, you know what I mean? I'm worried about what people think of me. You know what I mean? Oh my God, like, you read, after you've written it, it does something neurologically that you think, oh, this is not that relevant after all, is it? So you start to sort of sit with your own truthful thoughts. Yeah. And then, you've kind of done a few things there. You've de-stressed, and possibly you've basically peeled back like an onion, those layers of social conditioning that we all left with, to your true authentic self. And you sit there for a moment, and then you start to peel back anything that might have been stopping you, because we all want to achieve certain things, and more often than not, it's because we tell ourselves a story or whatever. But in my opinion, that dismantles everything. Yeah. Especially when you write it down. Yeah.
And have you found that with clients as well? Obviously for yourself it works, but have you got that feedback from them specifically?
Yeah, I had all kinds of things, So obviously, for me, I train a lot of corporate powermen. I'm sure they would love it. I called them that, but they're like execs and they're working hard, and they almost brag about how much they work hard and whatever. But at the same time, they're obviously good people. But when they write it down, they're like, this is so lame. You got these overly masculine men. I get them to write it down, and actually, in a slightly lower voice, they'll say, that shit actually works. And I'm like, yeah, can you believe it? And you start to get, I think life is largely, and transformations and health is all about truth and vulnerability. And even if, these guys that I work with, once they write it down as masculine and as proving as they are, they go, actually that, and they do it. They keep doing it, but they probably wouldn't tell their friends that they do it. That probably stays between us. And I won't name any names, but that's the way it works. And, I've had women cry, you know what I mean? Like I've had them bawl their eyes out and tell me the next day they were crying for half an hour, but when they woke up, they felt so much better, because, we're humans at the end. We're very complex individuals, and we have all these fucking build-ups of feelings, and it's like, write them out. See what it looks like. Yeah. Sit with it. And, again, all of this, how does it relate to health and fitness? Largely. Because health and fitness is all about taking action. And action with certainty, and action with absolute intention. And if your mind is clear and pure and, you're sort of free, the results are incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you spoke about before, your physiology dictates your psychology, but I think it also works the other way as well. If your psychology, if you've got the right mindset, you're going to be the person who's going to come back to the gym, or you're going to follow your nutritional plan. Yeah. If you've got that approach, which we've been speaking about. Now, just jumping around a little bit, I just want to dig deep and sort of find out what
initially
drew you to Dubai, because I think you were probably, out of the people that I knew, you were probably the first guy in my social circle that moved to Dubai. What made you jump off that initial decision to move here?
It's a great question, and I didn't explore that much because I don't know why, but let's do it now. So, I was in Melbourne, and all of us were doing really well. It was fantastic, and I think I took one domestic flight before then, so I literally haven't even been out of Australia. And then I'm like, so I don't know, there was something in you start to do well, and I think I was 21. Yeah, I was 21, and then it was just like, what else is out there? And, at 21, I'd been doing what I do for like 2 years. And, I was watching all these people around the world and what they were doing. And it's like, I want to join these conversations. And it's like, if you're from Melbourne, it's at least a 10-hour flight anywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, this is going to be hard because you've got taxes, you've got flights that take a long time. And I knew, well, from what I gathered in the industry, because it's still a young industry and it's not heavily regulated and there's no certainty in progressions of careers, I knew that education was the cornerstone of everything. And so then you ask the question, it's like, well, how do I get best educated? And obviously I love a guy called Charles Poliquin, which at the time did very few tours to Australia. He was largely in America and Europe. And I'm like, okay, so where could I go that would put myself closer to that so I could, learn more and offer more value, just become a better trainer? And then, I don't know, I just, I'm quite like in touch with, I believe in, there are no coincidences. So, I asked this question and then, I'd never seen this before, but I was sitting in my lounge room in Melbourne and there was like a boat race in Dubai. And I'm like, man, that city looks incredible. And one of our friends, Adam, just moved there, another Adam.
Yeah.
And I messaged him and I said, what's going on there? Do you need any help? Is there any opportunity? And he's like, yeah. So within 2 weeks or something, I told all my clients and packed my stuff and I was ready to go.
Yeah.
I didn't really know too much about the place, but I kind of seen it, felt it. And something about intuition said, getting yourself out of like where you grew up, there's something to be said for that because you start to do stuff properly, like, I don't know, like fundamentally, you see all these things that show up, like getting your own house and paying your own bills and earning your keep, and then compare that with travel and, not knowing anyone. I just knew that, if I push myself out on the edge and just jump, I'll work it out. And that was the theory, and it seemed to be
You obviously just pushed yourself out of your comfort zone and forced yourself
the decision
to
was
grow
really quick. Yeah. And, many times I was like, what am I doing? But if I look back on my life, actually, in terms of progression, that's always where it happens.
Yeah.
Is, you have like a hunch and then you just run with it.
Yeah.
Actually, if anyone's into literature, there's a girl called Mel Robbins. She's fantastic. She has this theory that, like if you sit on an idea and you ask the question openly and just, you let your subconscious mind answer.
She's the lady who wrote the 4-second rule or
5-second
rule.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. And I kind of, this is how I came to Dubai without even noticing. It showed up and I ran with it. Because what happens is you get your most purest thought in that first 5 seconds before your logical brain kicks in and tries to talk you out of it. I mean, just think about anything, it's that first instinct and you run with it. It's like the difference, like, once you start to explore sleep, I mean, I don't know who presses the snooze button. I haven't done it for many years now, but I used to. But if you just get up and move, you're not tired anymore. But the snooze is a trap because you've let that part of your brain negotiate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Mel Robbins negotiates. She says it much better and she goes into the actual science behind it. But there is an argument for a deep intuition and following that, because often the answer is revealed to you like quite purely, again, before that rational part of your brain takes over.
You don't question yourself as much because you've just listened to that first instinct, and you spoke about it before that.
That's the one. Yeah.
The frontal brain, is responsible obviously for that sort of deep thinking, and it probably takes you out of that zone.
And then on that case, decision paralysis is like, will be, it's, not making a decision is essentially a decision.
Exactly.
And I learned that the hard way because it's not always like I honored that rule. I kind of wish I still did, but there's times where I talk myself out of stuff that, but every time I've done it and honored that kind of deep intuition feeling, it's generally led me to a good place. And that's how I got to Dubai. It's just asking a question and just letting your body answer it, letting your subconscious mind. And
how long's it been for you being in Dubai?
2009 I got here, so if you do the math, that's like 10 years.
It's come around quick.
It's one of those places hard to leave. It's like, it's such an environment, and it starts from the leadership in the country and filters down, but it really does promote like innovative thinking. It's quite, it grows. They invest in the growth of the place. They're trying to make it better. I mean, you meet people from everywhere, and I find that it is just a community of like free thinkers and people that just want to sort of, make some noise in some way.
Yeah. And I've heard you speak about before Dubai and how grateful you are for the opportunities and what it's given to. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, so you could probably start with the actual place itself. So, I mean, if anyone's been to Dubai, there's so many different like nationalities here. And it's the same theory for everyone else. Generally, obviously, you're not from here, besides obviously the Emirati clients. So you've sort of migrated here. So then there's all these expatriates who are quite open to conversations and connection. And so there is this sort of approach of like everyone's kind of like receptive and they allow kind of like, conversations to come in from different angles. So basically, you've got a great mix of, different consciousness levels from around the world, from so many different countries and what they value and their traits. And you really start to learn about everything because of the diversity of the culture. And then you got that, and then, it's obviously quite easy to set up a business, and there's great gyms here and the weather's good. And then you've got the ability to, to travel around Europe. Like it's at your doorstep.
Yeah.
And of course, the no tax thing obviously always helps because it's a fantastic variable when you're a trainer and you're working on the hour. It's funny. I remember when I was in Melbourne, I had no idea how to run my books, and I did like a couple of years, and you earn good cash, and then I spent it all, and then I got a bill from the tax department, and I literally had a heart attack. Yeah, spend that back, and again, I learned the hard way, but it definitely does. In your 20s especially, give you a kind of a good platform to do two things, kind of live how you want, but also save for the long term, which is, get to put yourself in a great position for that aspect.
Yeah. And if you could just, I guess, cast your mind back, I always ask this of my guests that I come on, is there any sort of pivotal, I guess, mistakes or things that you did maybe when you first got to Dubai or maybe back in the QV days that you think, why the hell did I do that? Obviously, we learn from it, but is there something that comes to mind with that?
This one's very easy to answer, and it's been the core of, basically getting results with clients is, I think there was a few years there where I just stopped studying as much. And, for me, I like learning and feeding the brain, whether it's psychology, nutrition, functional medicine, movement, whether it's body composition, athletic movement, anything. So I just stopped. I don't know why. Like, it was just
what period was this?
Probably like years. It was a long time ago, thankfully. It was like year probably 2 to 3 here.
Okay.
And, because obviously the pressures of, forming some kind of like community and reputation and, basically a life for yourself, I think maybe the pressure I kind of compromised those educational values. And then what that led to was, there was something internally that I didn't like because I wasn't learning, and that kind of lights me up a bit. And, I believe that, the people that are in your life are kind of a mirror of who you are. So it's not like you get lucky and you just get to work with certain people. I believe you attract who you are. And then at that point, my client lists were, the cycle of a client probably wasn't as long. My results weren't as good. And then I kind of just sat with that, after 2 years of maybe just trying to, turn out sessions and still try to work as good as I could. I still thought, why am I not influencing enough change, and and why are my clients kind of rotating through it probably more regularly than I wanted? And the answer was, go and study, go and work, and it starts with yourself. You know what I mean? Make sure that you're educating, and then afterwards, I really stepped it up and did a lot more courses, which obviously led to better results, which led to a lot more development. Not only the way I show up, but how I write programs. And results are results, right? If you get a client results, they're going to stay and they refer. Which the biggest mistake is don't compromise what you're passionate about. And for me, that was education. And once I gave that up, my day didn't look anywhere near what I wanted it to. And the people I was working with, I couldn't get the most out of it.
Yeah, so there was obviously a direct correlation between lack of education and I guess your results, but also like the cash coming through
of everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it wasn't where I wanted to be, and wasn't someone that I'd always set myself. I do. You're in this industry because we want to help people, and I was like, I'm not doing such a great job at it. And that for me was because, I just got lazy. I thought maybe I'd done enough courses already. And so I stopped doing it, and, I just work now and, but for me, that's a big no-no. And that was probably my biggest mistake, I think.
Yeah. So something that I've sort of admired from you is your ability to lock on to a specific topic or a content. And I think we touched on it before. You found Charles Poliquin, and I think either you or someone else said to me that you were the biggest spender in terms of
courses. Yeah, there was one year where I was right up the top of the list there because it's funny because it ties into the last question. Where I kind of the biggest mistake. The year after was the one where I just literally
went crazy,
chased the guy around the world, and it was the case. Yeah, exactly. So I just went all in and went the other way, and everything got a lot better. But that's basically.
Yeah. But where did you get that just to go to lock on to a specific topic or a person? And then obviously you saw how successful Charles Poliquin was and how much results. But I guess I find it from myself because I learn from a lot of different people, and I probably have less direct focus. I guess what would your advice be to a coach, or it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's into training, but how to get that, I guess, clarity that you had, that you wanted to learn specifically from him to get those results?
This is a good question. So I think it comes down to the questions. So the questions you ask will largely determine what answers you give, right? So for me, I'd take a client on, and there's all these kind of things that you learn when you first come out of you get your PT certificate and whatnot. So, you take someone and you write them a nutrition program and you plan a training program. That's okay. And then they come in and they see you and you take them through it and the results are okay. So then it's like, no, something's got to change here. And then, I started listening, what kind of how can I innovate, who I am and what I offer? And then Charles's voice sunk in. So he was very much like, okay, there's, when you take on a client, he started speaking concepts that I'd never heard. So, in nutrition, most of the time you hear that if you create a deficit, most people lose fat. And he had these profound concepts like, what kind of food and supplements you take can influence, your hormonal profile. Your body composition is correlated to certain endocrine imbalances. He started talking about gut health. He started talking about movement and parameters that dictate what kind of results you get. And I kind of thought, well, this sounds a lot more sort of like, well, he speaks this language where it's vague yet specifics in terms of this. He teaches you the colors, and how you paint the picture is up to you. But knowing the colors are very important. So getting a more fundamental understanding of how the body works is everything. So when you start to look at all the other systems like, digestive health, you look at food intolerances, and then, you start to play with it over time, you start to create, you start to recognize what's needed. So there's all these common things that show up that I do. So basically, to give you an example, so nowadays it gets to the point where obviously you take a client on and you do the psychology part, but then when you sort of delve into strategy, you look at nutrition, food intolerance, digestive health, then you look at body composition, and then you look at how to write a program that's going to influence that person's goal based off science, not just random fact. So he kind of said, if this shows up, here's a good way to think about it. So then what I would do is I would work with a client and I'd be like, hey, this showed up. Why? For instance, why are their inflammation levels high? They're on a calorie deficit. They're training really hard. Why aren't they getting enough fat loss results? So then you have to ask the question. And then, you learn all this stuff. And then as you go on, if you keep asking a question on how to get better or how to get better results, the answer is revealed to you in terms of a topic. And then for me, I like to get a really fundamental understanding of that topic. And that's when you start to really sort of delve into specificity and getting exact principles and, and really paying attention to, that certain issue and then really, again, getting an understanding and then working out how to deal with it. So I guess it's the questions you ask along the way when you're learning and you're working with clients that will kind of like, I don't know, trigger certain parts of you to follow up and do the research and then create a protocol accordingly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. But I also think the power of you, if you follow that method, because a lot of people will take a little bit from everywhere and it gets, a lot of the time, can be watered down.
Yeah.
And so by you subscribing to one system, you test that system, you obviously ask the questions like you spoke about before.
Yeah.
But you're using it. And I admire this about Eloy as well, a guy that I've had on the podcast as well.
Yeah.
Is when he goes to a course, he'll come back from the course and he'll do whatever he learns on that course straight away. So
he'll
implementation.
implement it. Yeah.
And I think with you as well, just watching you from the outside, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that something, I guess, you instill yourself that you would do?
Yeah. So for instance, you go to a course, like a general course, and I used to do this, it's like, what's the issue? So let's just take a simple one, like the person, let's explore like blood sugar, or something like that. And then you just ask for the answer. And then it's like, here's a protocol. And then you're like, okay, walk out, I've got a blood sugar protocol. Great, fantastic. I'm gonna change as many people's blood sugar levels as I can. And then obviously blood sugars governs a lot of variables like, body composition, how much energy you have and whatever. So it's very important. And so you go, okay, it's important, that's the protocol. But then, no, that for me, it doesn't quite work like that. So I want to know, how did they come up with the protocol? What variables, what did they look at to derive those variables? And then, you can start to understand fundamentally what it stems from and the research behind it.
Yeah.
And then you can start to create more sort of, I guess, bespoke protocols for people, because no two people are the same and they shouldn't be treated the same. So when you see a protocol, it's like an end result for someone. So if you're just, copy pasting that out, I think that you're neglecting a large part of what we do, which is individualism, expression, DNA, environmental factors, their stress levels. And again, it's just being specific with that client. So can you give them what they need, not what you believe they need? That's the difference. And that's, again, the question you ask. Yeah.
And I think that relates back to what we spoke about with Anthony Robbins before. He talks about, I've heard him speak about it, it's knowing what and why, not necessarily how. And I think if you're going to courses and trying to educate yourself, if you're just focused purely on the outcome of how do we do this, you're sort of missing the picture of encapsulating everything.
Yeah. One of my clients, he taught me a really good skill and a way of thinking. So he went to Oxford, and I said, I just asked him, like, what was one of the biggest things? Can you tell me something you learned from that? Because I just respected this guy. So right now, I'll just give you an idea of what he does. He works for governments, and what does he do? He basically takes education, and there's like a certain amount of kids go to school. So his job's to come in, work out why they're not going to school, and get more kids to attend school. So he has to look at a whole lot of data, make sense of it, and implement a strategy to get more kids to school. So this is like kind of like really big macro thinking and understanding variables and data. And I'm like, that sounds pretty complicated. Where do you even start? He's like, and this is what he told me. He's like, in Oxford, they used to give him like, 6 thick books and say, we're going to test you on all these books in 6 days. And I'm like, what, did you read them all in 6 days? He said, no. He said, what he did is he kind of got a gist of what the all 6 books were trying to say, understand the fundamental principles that they had in common, really sit with that. And then you can kind of like start to get like a conceptual understanding as opposed to an absolute understanding of what they're trying to say. And then he could, do the exam. And of course he got, but they deliberately know you're not going to get through all the content, and probably you shouldn't, but you should work out, what's trying to be said here and how to make sense of it, and then how to implement something from that. So that way of thinking, that story you told me was like, it sort of blew my mind a bit. We mean they throw like 6 textbooks at you and they say, we're going to test you on them in 2 days. Like, I think I'd have hard.
Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying this episode. Just a reminder to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Now back to the interview.
But what he said, how he did it, and then, how they then test you from that, was quite profound. And it's something that I sort of took into all my studies. It's like, what are they really trying to say?
Yeah.
What's the truth behind it? Where are they looking to get the answer? And I believe that's the case. If you look at the root cause and you look at, where you need to be looking, the answer kind of, again, will just reveal itself for that person.
Yeah. Now, just shifting gears a little bit, sort of moving around back again, obviously it's all interrelated to education. And just from watching your social media over the last, I guess, 12 months or so, there's been a bit of a shift in what the way you sort of communicate with people, and it's obviously interrelated to what you've learnt along the way. But could you just explain for people that might not have heard it before, but what is J-Flow and what is the concept?
So J-Flow is a concept. It was myself and my girlfriend, we came up with it because, she's extremely passionate about what she does, and so am I. So we'd sit there and we'd share space and time, and we'd just think about how can we have more an influence on people, how can we sort of step up and deliver more value and contribute and grow. And then we kind of she's amazing at what she does, and she owns this space in energy, and it's so beautiful, and we kind of learnt from each other and created what we call J-Flow. And flow, if you don't know, is a concept. I can never pronounce his last name, and if you can, I mean, that's quite an achievement.
I can look it up.
His name is Mihei something.
Jinsek Mihai, whatever it is.
It's long, but he explains that any emotion you feel at any given time can be traced along a graph, and the basic continuums are challenge level versus skill level. So when you graph it, I mean, I highly suggest check it out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And basically, he found that he studied chess players, musicians, and actually he did the study to work out. He wanted to know what makes people happy. And what he led to was, well, not only does it make you happy, it makes you largely successful at certain things and whatever. But that was basically when you use your skill. Just say you built a life around contributing to society in a certain way. For us, it's a coach, a health coach, and then you trace it on the other continuum, which is challenge level. So you use all your skills, and your highest challenge level, you get a quadrant called flow, and there's a TED talk on it. It's worth listening to. And at that point, it's where time becomes obsolete. You're just immersed in what you do. And everyone has it. That's why, whether it's playing music or sports, when, 4 hours could just go past and you don't even know what happened. Yeah. But you're just in this state. Like, think about a musician or something like that. They're just in the zone. Another word is the zone.
Yeah. I actually read a book. It's called The Rise of Superman.
Yeah.
And they quote that guy that I can't pronounce his last name.
Yeah.
And it talks about flow states specifically with extreme sports.
Yeah.
Because you're switching off, I guess, that frontal conscious part of your brain.
And you're left with this real powerful existence. And that's when you're the most happiest. And that's when you just really start to tap into, how good you are. And it's a beautiful place to be because, it is where results happen. So, knowing what flow meant and, what myself and Yelena wanted to contribute, we came up with the concept because it's like, well, what if we could do our very best to get people to step into flow more often than not? And obviously our names both start with J, so it's our interpretation of flow, so it's called J-Flow. And basically what we want people to do is to step into that quadrant where they're existing in their highest potential. And I believe in that state, no matter who you are, and when you get someone excited or you're excited, your ability to deliver results is multiplied, and it's probably more than you could imagine. So it starts to exceed anything you could possibly have thought about yourself. So flow is where we want to bring most people into, and we know fundamentally, that comes from a great existence, which means that, you need to be nourished, you need to be moving, and you need to be, aligned with your spiritual self, whatever you want to call it. But you need to be, you don't need to be anything, but if you're more likely to be in flow if everything else has gone right. So we found that, once you really sort of help a client, with their health and fitness and whatever and psychology, that they spend a lot more time there. And then life gets better in so many ways, whether it's the way they look, it's the way they feel, the way they treat their partners, how they show up at work. And I mean, you as a trainer, I'm sure, you see your clients, and a lot of them don't just thank you for how they look. Sure, they get leaner. They start to thank you about how they're living their life now, because they can't quite put a pin on it. They're like, what's going on? They show up in all these other areas in life because that's what good health does.
Yeah.
Right. And then that's what we want to bring people into flow.
Yeah.
So it's something we're very passionate about, and it means a lot to us because, when you see people start to own that space, man, it's incredible,
And so what is the plan in the future for that? Is that a separate business? I guess obviously you're delivering that to your individual clients, but is that something you're going to be delivering in? Before we hit record on the thing, we were speaking about you doing more public speaking.
Yeah.
Is that more aligned with that, or is that we're?
It's funny because we're both, we've both got a bit of a hippie side. Obviously I bring Elaine into the conversation. She's part of J-Flow. So, I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is start to be a bit creative and not follow norms. So what we always do is we sit there and we're like, you sit there and we meditate, and then we say, how can we contribute and add value to as many people as we can?
Yeah.
And then the answer reveals itself. So is there a specific thing that we're going to do? Well, we've started to create some things. So I'll give you an example. So, we're very big on psychology. So we're looking at a space that we want to open, and basically, you come in. We do a detailed interview, we do body composition measurements, nutritional programming. We might send you to get some blood chemistry panels. We teach you how to move, whether that's yoga, whether it's in your house, whether it's whatever. But if you look at J-Flow, the tagline is basically nutrition, movement, and health. And that's fundamentally what we're about to. We're looking for a space now, and we want to basically create that.
Yeah.
So we look.
And you're talking about in Dubai.
Yeah, in Dubai.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
we'll keep you updated on that.
Yeah.
But if we can create a space where you can step into and learn how to nourish your body with food and vitamins, learn how to change behavioral patterns, and then move in a way that's complementary to your lifestyle, whether it be strength training. Elena's invented this thing called flow yoga, which is incredible. Whatever it is, but basically any kind of movement that's going to get the result.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we're working on, how to communicate that. We know the intention and what we want to bring to the person, but what does that look like? We're refining as we go, kind of thing.
Yeah. I'll definitely keep the listeners updated on that.
Yeah.
So switching gears specifically to training,
Sure.
Can you just run us through your, I guess, style, your philosophy, in particular aesthetics, body composition, and just your overall.
Most people come to me because they want to look better. So that's great, and I think that's a good gift to give someone. So you take someone in, and to be honest, a lot of my training still largely is governed by PICP2, which is Charles Poliquin's program. I think it's definitely the best course I've ever taken. So you take a client in, and you assess the client. You look at where they're strong, where they're weak. You have a really good, strong profile. So the assessment is number one. Because you need to be structurally strong before you do anything. So alignment and structural balance is always number one, no matter what your goal is.
Yeah.
Then, based off your outcome, we then start to create framework that suits it. For instance, it's relative to where you are right now in terms of body fat levels and where you want to go. So first, we start with your outcome, and then we reverse engineer the program based off your outcome. So we know that, say, if you want to lose a large amount of body fat in the next 8 weeks, but you don't care how much muscle you put on, well, then the framework is revealed to me. So I know I need to keep that person under tension in an exercise for, say, 60 to 90 seconds, and I want to select exercise that's relevant to their postural sort of profile and also what they want to see. So I use, generally full body movements, and I pair them up in a way that, getting a fundamental understanding, it's just probably tapping back. I think it's really important to know what you want. So basically, if you can help someone understand how lean they want to be, how much lean muscle tissue they want to be, and how they want their posture to look, that will determine what exercise exercises you choose and what training program you give. You know, for instance, let's take a typical male. He wants to be, you know, he's, you know, whatever, say he's 20% body fat, he wants to be 10, but doesn't care how much muscle he's on. So I'm going to give that guy an all over body workout, and I'm not going to pay too much attention to any one specific muscle group.
Yeah.
Now, if I have a guy that's like, you know, I want to be sub 10, I specifically want chest and arms at a certain level. During that process, I would have to design a program that honors the muscle tissue growth on chest and arms, as well as getting leaner.
Yeah. And from a program design, is that where you'd step out and do more of like less PRCP or more of the structured periodized programming into more of like a bodybuilding style?
Yeah, correct. So then there's obviously like, you know, you want to deliver results over a timeline for a client because, again, results trump motivation, because I find that if you just deliver someone the result that they want, irrespective of your own point of view. See, I think that's another important thing as a trainer. You need to understand what the client really wants, not what you think that they might need. So if they want specific muscle in that region, then what's the fastest and most effective way to do it? Generally speaking, if they want to grow a lot of lean, healthy muscle tissue, well, you can be sure it's going to be some kind of like specific bodybuilding phase. But just say if we put the muscle tissue on and they're not happy with how their abdominals are or how lean they are, they might communicate that to me, in which case I'll switch back to some kind of body composition protocol.
Yeah.
But it's a delicate balance of correct application to the desired outcome that they want. And then you just pick the best means for that.
Yeah.
And that could be anything. Like I have girls that just don't want any muscle at all.
Yeah.
So they'll literally, you know, I'll break the rules for them because they want to look a certain way, like the rules. I mean, there's no rules, but you know, it's, you just must pay respect to what that person wants.
Yeah. And I guess that it comes down to experience as well, because what you might set out to do with your structured program and you come in and assess them might not work.
Yeah.
And then you go back and you change it.
Well, I think the most important thing when just say, you know, you choose the right program, you create the right program. The number one lesson that I learned is start to create trends and data. So for instance, you know, like you said correctly, everyone comes from different parts of the world. They have different fiber makeups, all these different variables. So, you know, you try something, and this is why I believe in, you know, so I assess my clients every couple of weeks. We do body composition measurements. We take a look at the body, you know, what's changing, what's not changing. And then you'll implement a strategy, but you should always audit your own strategy and then readjust accordingly. And then what you get is when you eventually get the client to look how they want to look, which is the overall goal, you've kind of showed them along the way what works, what doesn't work. So because you've created the trend, you often catch what doesn't work earlier, and then you can make the switch so you're not pressing the wrong button for too long.
Yeah.
And you know, you start to break through plateaus because you've actually, you know, kept data and you've actually been paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it comes back to a famous quote by Peter Drucker. It's like what gets measured gets managed.
Absolutely.
If you're measuring it,
yeah,
then you know if it's working, if it's not working. But all too often you see a lot of people go wrong as they're just not saying, they don't know if they're effective.
Yeah, well, I see the biggest mistake is most people, you know, Einstein said it's the definition of an idiot or something like that, but it's like they keep trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I've done that too, right? It's, you know, when you start to write your own programs based off emotion, you know, and then logically it doesn't add up, you know, I'm guilty of that, you know what I mean? I did that for several years, you know, I'm like, why doesn't this work? Well, I've probably been doing the same thing, you know what I mean? And sometimes, you know, you take a client and you know what's in the literature, you might give them something that, you know, works, and it's not written anywhere, but it works because you've paid attention and you've worked out that client maybe doesn't grow muscle tissue from 6 to 8 reps. I've had guys grow off 2 to, you know, reps of 3 to 5, and it's like, well, that's not what the textbook says, but it's actually what happened. Yeah. So knowing what's present and knowing and collecting data and then auditing that is the key. Yeah,
because it's not necessarily anecdotal. It's because it's you. You are the sample size. You are there. You are the coach, and you are getting you are taking them closer to point B, or you're moving them further away.
Yeah, and if you don't assess, you don't really know. Exactly, and you know, we all tell ourselves like stories because, you know, another one is you know, being vulnerable and truthful. Tell the truth about where you are right now, because then you can change it. You know, like, many reasons, like even for myself, when I was at PT and I went through my own personal transformation, because obviously your own business card to a degree, right? I didn't quite get as lean as I wanted, as fast as I wanted, and I would do body comp measurements and I would dread them because, it felt like I wasn't getting progress fast enough. And then sometime it was revealed to me that I just wasn't. And it's quite upsetting, you work really hard and then you get, you check and you audit and actually you got worse. And it's like, that is a tough pill to swallow. But at the same time, you sit with that for a minute and you change your strategy and something else works. But if I just ignored that and didn't, audit myself, well, who knows? It could have been running the wrong way for a long time.
A lot of times that's the biggest gift, is when you might go backwards and you start to question yourself. Like there's a book by Stuart McGill and he talks about the gift of injury and how sometimes the injury can actually teach you.
Catalyst for something.
Yeah, teach you that you had this different pathology that you might need to rethink the way you're executing, whether it's a low bar squat or a high bar squat. It might not have been the right exercise for you specifically. So just moving on to nutrition, and you spoke about before, vitamins and I guess nutritional principles. Just if you could sort of encapsulate it, give us a bit of a snapshot on what your thoughts and beliefs are around nutrition.
Nutrition is probably one of the trickiest ones in the world because, it's associated with a lot of things like social events and, the fastest way on earth to feel good again is just to eat some sugar, right? You feel amazing afterwards. So I think there's all these like, I guess, there's all kinds of challenges when it comes to nutrition more than anything. And we all know that nutrition creates the environment for results. So how do I look at this? Well, I'm not big on calorie counting, although fundamentally it is the essence of getting results, but I'll explain why I'm not so big on that. And I'm also not big on detailed nutrition plans unless I know the client wants it. And both cases, I do that for some people. That I know are ready to step into that space. So where do we start with them? Well, it's all about educating my clients on, food is essentially information. So what you eat tells your body to do something. And I kind of teach them behavioral patterns and ways to basically try to get them to look at food in a more nourishing, outcome-driven way. So if, for instance, we know that food influences body composition, endocrine function, brain chemistry, energy. So what I try and do is actually teach my clients about that. Like, good fat doesn't raise insulin and it's more sustainable energy. You pair that with a protein that's going to address these areas. So I kind of teach them about nutrients and what nutrient does what. And then I give them general framework. And I'll teach them more about body comp and then how to select foods for that goal. So basically I teach clients about food and then how to choose food for a certain outcome. So then when they go to eat, they're basically going to be selecting food knowing what it does. So when you teach them the why behind their nutritional choices, it starts to, they feel like they have more freedom and naturally they eat a lot better and they actually eat lower calories because if you're eating the right foods, it generally doesn't cause you to overeat. Coupled with that, I'm quite big on inflammatory foods and cutting them out. So I just wrote a blog series on food toxins, and they're like the most likely food toxins in the world that will cause some kind of inflammation or disruption in your GI tract in the world. So sometimes it's good to get a good food intolerance test. And then you kind of get a list of foods that, you can eat, or you should eat more of and should eat less of. Yeah. So once you have that framework, it then ties back to me teaching clients about what to eat to give you what result. And, like I said, I think food should be largely a non-judgment based space. I want my clients, I'll teach them so much about food that if they want to get lean that week, they literally know how to construct their meals. They know what to eat and when, because I've taught them that will give them that result. And generally that's all I do. So I show them rough portion sizes and how to sort of, construct a meal on your plate and what that will do for you and how that will be a contribution towards your goal, your energy, your brain function, your digestive tract, all these kind of things. So it's more about teaching, educating and creating behaviors. if that makes sense,
Yeah,
than it is with
absolutely.
absolute strategy.
Yeah. And moving, I guess, the kind of intertwines as well. But just reading a lot of your blogs before, you're obviously a big proponent on supplementation.
Yeah.
Missing, if you're missing key minerals, vitamins is going to be obviously detrimental to your health. What's your approach to that? And what are your sort of, I guess, go-to supplements for someone who's looking to drop a little bit of body fat?
Yeah. So when you look at supplementation, even I questioned, is it worth it or not? So when you do the research, you look at all these kind of people around the world that have maybe run, blood profiles. So first of all, I'm big on testing. The best way to do it is to do something like maybe an organic acids test and a general vitamins and minerals test, and then you can kind of replace that. But let's assume you don't have the means to do that because, it's not always you have proactive medicine specialists in your area.
No.
So, there's a general health protocol, and everyone kind of has one. But when you look at supplementation, there is this common denominator of staple supplements between, the guys that I respect around the world that coach nutrition. And that's like some kind of digestive, a multivitamin for just general vitamins and minerals, zinc for like absorption levels, magnesium for like stress and sleep, fish oil and D3. So that's my general protocol. And where that comes from is, it really delves back to the way that agriculture is these days. So we found that if you test an apple now versus 30 years ago, there's all these different kind of minerals and vitamins that just aren't there anymore. And that's largely because there's more and more chemicals in the soil and, farmers are doing more things to turn over profits. Like, instead of nourishing the soil, letting it sit there, they're constantly turning it over.
Yeah.
You get pesticides.
Yeah.
So all the general health protocol is basically, where did it get created from, was a lot of common deficiencies with people around the world. And you could almost assume that upping these vitamins and minerals, it puts you in a really safe place in terms of like nourishment, because we've just seen, over the years that these minerals specifically just aren't in the food anymore.
Yeah. And I guess that it comes down to like a little bit of a shotgun, like these are the common areas, particularly in this region, this part of the world. I'm sure you've come across a lot. Most people are vitamin D deficient here.
Yeah, exactly.
Ironically, there's sun here, but not everyone goes out.
Yeah.
And particularly, obviously, the locals and people with darker skin don't tend to spend as much time in the sun.
Yeah. But just on that as well, like when it comes to supplements, like absolutely everyone should have their own protocol. And that comes from symptoms, it comes from blood work, it comes from, stuff that shows up and potential sort of like, I guess you would say, what they're eating right now. Maybe they're lacking certain vitamins and minerals by their current diet, and we just know that it needs to be a very specific approach to the client. And then you have to, you sit down with a client, you really profile them well, whether you do bloods or don't do bloods, but you can start to get clarity on what that person, what might be a contribution for that person. It's not like you just say, here's the general subs and take that. It's more sort of being aware of what the client might need. Yeah,
exactly. I spoke about this with Jeremy, and I'm not sure of your stance on it, but in terms of IV therapy, what I don't know if you're for and against it, but what would be the possible people that would benefit from it?
Yeah.
And if you believe in it yourself?
Yeah. So I've done it quite extensively. It was more of a case of, so IV therapy is a great way to get vitamins and minerals in the blood without digesting it. So what's largely prevalent in today's society is a lot of people are having issues digesting. And, we say in functional medicine, you are what you absorb and you are what you don't excrete. And there's just so much that shows up with absorption. So straight away, IV, the benefit is absorption. Goes straight into your bloodstream. In IV clinics, they can only use pharmaceutical grade stuff. And it's a really fast and effective way to get easily digestible nutrients in the blood. Now, is it for everyone? Most people don't need it, right? But there is some good science behind it, when it comes to like glutathione, vitamin C, especially because you can really go with a higher dose. And vitamin C generally is the vitamin for stress. It helps buffer cortisol a lot. So if you're quite stressed and maybe your diet isn't so great, that's a really good way to kind of like, put yourself on the right track and maybe take a big leap forward. So ultimately, my answer is going to be, if it's relevant to the person, sometimes it's a great idea. But for everyone, I'm not. I'm convinced that you should address diet first. You should address movement first, and then if they're an athlete or they're trying to really sort of tap into some kind of level of performance that they really want, then it's relevant.
Yeah.
So it's great if it's applicable.
Yeah. And just touching on just personally your experience with it, what did you find a big difference when you had it?
So for instance, like if, I'm my own worst enemy at times. So usually I do about 14 appointments a day and I train and I blog. So, whether I like to admit it or not, my adrenal glands cop an absolute pasting every day. So for me, the vitamin C variable was fantastic. I found that.
And you could actually feel tangibly the benefits.
You have adrenal glands, right? And how healthy they are, your adrenals will determine how much kind of cortisol you can produce or androgens or whatever, right? So basically, even in Chinese medicine, so if you go and see a Chinese medicine specialist, before they do anything, they test your adrenals and they see how well they function. And if there's a need to address that, they will do that first because they believe that is the cornerstone of everything. It's like the raw material that makes all the good stuff, that helps you get leaner, think more, move faster. So looking after your adrenals is one of the most important things you can do. Yeah. And for me, because of the way I live, which I'll never change because I'm quite an A-type personality and I kind of have an obsessive personality when it comes to like, what I do. Yeah. So it's like, well, I'm not going to change. So what can I do to maybe complement that? And for me, glutathione, it's one of the only nutrients in the body that can cross the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most abundant antioxidants in the brain. So, for me, placebo aside, when you do vitamin C and glutathione, which is basically all I do, my brain functions a lot clearer, faster. So when you think something and then you can verbalize it much faster, there's that when you're on your game, you just know how to say it, what to say it, when to say it. That's what glutathione does for me. And vitamin C helps keep my adrenals pretty fresh. So for me, my experience is fantastic. But again, I'm on my feet 14, 15 hours a day, plus I'm blogging, plus I'm reading. So I always like to look after my adrenal glands and my brain because it's paramount.
And I guess, is there anything else that you would do personally to take care of your adrenals apart from what we spoke about before? Like obviously with your meditation practices, IV therapy, is there anything else you specifically would do? Because I think all the listeners, all the people I know, most people's adrenals taking a beating. What would be some general advice for
besides
people?
This is something that took me a while to learn. It's actually quite simple, but so just assume that you're eating a nourishing diet. Maybe you do IV to keep your nutrient status where they need to. You make sure you don't have any sort of digestive or food intolerance. So you've done the strategy part. Let's assume that that's fine. You're functioning well. It's just a lifestyle issue. Meditation is a really big one. So obviously like peace of mind, slowing down the breathing, really asking yourself some deep questions and understanding and putting yourself in alignment with, everything that you want to be and everything that you are. That's huge. And then the last one is actually quite funny because it's a really, it seems really obvious, but it's not. It's called have fun. And it's just like, it's just go and do something random, you know what I mean? So for me, it's whether it's like, go on a holiday. I always often have my best ideas on a holiday. So sometimes you need to break the pattern to create something else. So for me, fun. Yeah. Like, when you're a kid, you don't ever do anything else unless you believe that it's going to be fun. Yeah. And as adults, we kind of maybe take ourselves too serious. So my tip for everyone is probably live in a bit more chaos instead of order all the time,
Yeah.
and maybe have a bit more fun. And, again, for me growing up, I wanted to prove myself worthy and be really good. Great. That's fantastic. But, you start to lose, what it means to be human. And that's actually have fun, take your woman out for a nice dinner on a Tuesday. Well, why do you have to wait till the weekend?
Yeah. I think that's some powerful advice.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's effective. Go and do something that's not in your character. If you're introverted, go and do some stand-up comedy or something. Just break the trend, break the pattern. It's fun.
Yeah, that's great. So we're drawing to the end, and I've got a series of rapid-fire questions that I've usually asked my guests.
Yeah.
So they don't have to be rapid-fire answers, but you can take as long as you want with each of them.
Rapid fire.
Yeah. So
I like this.
what is your all-time favorite? You can pick one of each, or you can just pick one completely. Is favorite training book and/or self-help book?
Yeah.
That has had an impact significantly.
Yeah, I mean, I love the guys. So it's quite obvious for me. It was Tony Robbins, Unleash the Giant Within. And that was very much like, how to step in and own your existence.
Is that his first book?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know the timeline of his books, but it's really old school. I bought the book and the audio, and, he must have been like 24 or something like that. But the way he tells stories and drives meaning behind it, it really does... you start to challenge everything, everything that you do. Why do I go to work? What kind of relationship do I have? And these are questions I never really asked myself. Yeah. And at the start, they were tough to answer. But that whole book kind of gives you an idea on how to maybe answer them in your own way. Yeah,
it's an awesome book. And I've read, I think, probably all of his books, but I think that first one, it just really sort of hit me between the eyes, and it sort of...
if you speak to a lot of people now, like Andre Agassi and Serena Williams and Oprah, they've all read that book because that is kind of what they read it, and they're like, "Who is this guy?" Yeah, and that's how Agassi and stuff hired him, because it's like, this guy's talking like some sense.
Yeah, it certainly put him on the map.
Yeah,
I guess training book is there.
Yeah, training book. It was. Probably the best thing, and if you have insomnia, it's a great cure to fall asleep, but it was really good. It was when I did International Functional Medicine in California, and that manual, it's not really a commercial book, but it explains everything, and fundamentally everything in the body, from from cells, from tissues to organs to systems, everything that we're made up from. It gives you a really good understanding of why and how that is. And then you can start to see why, what shapes everything and symptoms and whatever. So in terms of strategy and technicalities, that kind of taught me the most, even though it's really painful to read, but at least it gave me an idea of how the body actually works. And then when you learn, you never know because it's constantly changing, how the body actually works, you can start to kind of ask better questions and, take different approaches with your clients. So that really opened me up to more than, knowing what's going on internally. It does give you a better understanding of what to do externally to create a different environment internally. If that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. What was the title of that one?
It's the International Functional Medicine handbook.
So I mean? It's a textbook.
If there was, it was a textbook. But it's like the Poliquin Principles is also good if you want to really light read. But he explains that just going into the gym and training randomly will not get you a certain result. I mean, it might get you somewhere nice, but if you want to see change over a timeline that's significant, you probably should maybe look into a strategy that would sort of dictate that outcome. And Poliquin Principle is a really simplistic way of saying, hey, if you want to be shredded, consider this. If you want to be strong, consider this. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
if you want to be good at sport, consider this. And that was kind of good.
Yeah, well, that's a book that's stood the test of time, and it's based around principles, so it's not going to date. Next one, favorite movie.
Yeah, I mean, this has been my favorite from all time, and probably because it had such a profound effect on me. It's definitely Fight Club. And what I love about that movie is, I don't know if everyone's watched it recently, but when I first watched it, I didn't quite understand it. But then when I watched it when I was a little bit older, it's very much about you know, and I fell victim of it, starting to get too attached to things and outcomes. So the whole movie, they use fighting as an expression of breaking sort of like an addiction to consumerism. Like you get one character, you know, he's obsessed with having matching furniture and a safe job, and then he creates this alter ego, which you find out is him anyway. And his job is to actually, you know, wake him up and
have to put a spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it.
If you haven't seen it. And his job is basically to wake him up and get him to act and be, you know, how he should, and, you know, really start to, you know, I guess value being a human more than, you know, value who you are and your relationships more than things. And, you know, it's a simple movie, but he does a really good job at detaching you from consumerism and bringing you into owning sort of your power and identity. And it's a great movie for me. I think it's fantastic.
No, it's an awesome movie. I've seen it many times. Next one is, do you have any quotes that you live your life by or that you'd say on a daily basis?
Yeah. There's one that is literally, I read it every morning, and it's by a lady called Marianne Williamson, and she's a fascinating woman because she grew up in her family. Her mum and dad were preachers, and she basically was like a sex and a drug addict and self-destructed, and she basically revamped her life, and now she's a public speaker. But listening to a lot of her work, I think it's definitely worth listening to. And one of the quotes that she says is, the only thing lacking in any situation is what you're not giving. So what does that mean if you think about it? It means that anytime, pick a situation, the only thing lacking from any situation is what you're not giving. So that allows you to do two things. Number one, take ownership of everything that's in your life right now. And the second one is, you know, Gandhi said it, be the change you want to see in the world. So often we find that, you know, if you want more love from someone, probably what you need to do is give them more love. If you want more respect, you probably need to respect yourself a bit more first. So what you crave generally is a byproduct of what you're not giving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
So you take ownership and you give what you want to receive. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's a great answer. What... this is a new one I've put in. I picked this up off someone else.
It's a trial.
If you could invite two celebrities or famous cultural figures to a dinner, they can neither be dead or alive, who would they be and why?
Yeah, you know, number one, it's quite obvious by now, would be Tony Robbins, because I mean, you sit at a seminar, and I've been to a Tony Robbins seminar with 10,000 people, and he gets on stage at 12 p.m. and he talks to 2 a.m. for 14 hours. Now, the people won't believe this. If you haven't, he does not leave the stage. He only drinks water. He doesn't go to the bathroom. He doesn't sit down ever. So he delivers something for 14 hours, right? 10,000 people, and this content is, I mean, he goes right in and tries to tear all your beliefs and insecurities and everything. Yeah. So there was people next to me crying, laughing, you know, jumping up on seats, giving it like, you know, just introverted people just like letting loose. And I'm like, how does this guy do that? There's 10,000 people, 14 hours straight, and you don't even realize. And it's like, that's a gift. Like, you try and sit through a 3-hour movie. I struggle to sit through a 3-hour movie, and people pay hundreds of millions to make that movie.
If I see 3 hours on the movie, I'm like, I don't want to do it.
Like, no way, I'm going to get home at this time, I'm going to get into bed. But this guy speaks for 14 hours with a microphone. And I mean, you're immersed. And not only am I immersed, there's, you know, 10,000 other people around me just literally on the end of their seats. So for me, there's something about that influence that, you know, I really love.
So him, and then who else would you invite?
You know, I didn't even read this question. But
I told you to pay attention to the end ones.
Yeah. You did actually, but you know, sometimes you just want to go off the cuff here. So if I was to get someone else to come in, I would just say, who would it be? I like that, and actually Deepak Chopra. You know why I love Deepak Chopra? Because he has such a profound understanding of physics and metaphysics and existence. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard his work, but when I first heard it, I'm like, what is this guy talking about? Like, this is insane. But then, you know, you start to look at like metaphysics and, he explains it really well in the sense of he describes, what you really are on a subatomic level. And then, like he's had so much, for instance, I'll give you an example and what his work's based around. So he became quite famous because he was one of the world's best endocrinologists. So basically he was a really good hormone specialist. And he quit because he was just tired of medicating hormone imbalances. He's like, you can do that with conscious thought and whatever. And people laughed at him, right? So what he did is he had this study where he got two groups, and one was placebo-based, one was actually chemo-based. So they gave them chemotherapy drugs, and the other one they didn't. And they basically, you have these things in your body called interleukins, and they basically help fight cancer. They're good immune cells. And, a good course of interleukins costs about $40,000, right? So it's quite expensive. So what he did was he gave one group the placebo and one group the chemo. So what they found is the group with the placebo started to get better because they thought that they were taking chemotherapy drugs. But at the same time, what happened is that they started, because they thought they were taking chemotherapy drugs, they started bleeding from their gums and losing their hair, but they weren't actually taking chemotherapy drugs. And I mean, this is an amazing story because, and then that was it. He started to explore this kind of like realm of possibility and conscious thought. And I mean, everyone has a different interpretation of it, but I mean, that story alone kind of like blew my mind. And it was like, there's more to us than what we can see, touch, feel, and all those senses. And I still haven't quite got a strong hold of what he says sometimes, but there's an element of me that's really curious into what he's talking about. Like if you think about Charles Darwin's principle of evolution, if you believe in evolution, you just watch, like, how did we change? We must have believed we needed something, and then the body adapted accordingly. But his principle is the conscious thought, changes everything else. Then you start to explore that notion, and you're like, people now can hold their breath underwater for 20 minutes. Yeah. It's like, so he explores consciousness and evolution and exactly where humans are going. And I love that conversation that he's throwing out there because I don't quite understand it, but there's a part of me that's like, if you look back, humans are evolving, and where does it go? And he kind of gives you a good idea of, he gives you his rundown of what that looks like.
He's an interesting man. I've read a couple of his books, but I definitely don't fully understand all the concepts that he talks about. Next one is, if you could be known for just one thing, what would it be?
It would be just allowing people to, it would be allowing people to creating the best version of themselves. So getting people to tap into their true potential and own that. And the platform is obviously through health and fitness, so nutrition, movement, and all these kind of things that contribute to you owning everything that you could be. Yeah,
that's a good answer. Now, final rapid fire question. If you could jump in a time machine and give advice to yourself when you first started working in a fitness first QV, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so my advice would be to focus more on two things: growth and contribution. So, when you first start, you're kind of looking at, how can I make this work? What do I need? I would kind of sit there and say, you already have everything. You're operating from a place of abundance. Just focus on growth and contribution. And the conversation I would have to myself is, if you really value those needs, without any kind of attachment to outcomes or judgments, you will naturally progress and unbiasedly start to tap into, basically everything you could possibly be. So more so, I would say it's like this, actually. Focus less on doing and focus more on two things. Who are you and how do you show up? So I ask myself those two questions every day. Who am I and how do I show up? I focus less now on what I need to be doing, because we're always doing. I need to do. Well, that's great, but probably if you take a step back and you ask yourself, who am I and how I show up, the doing part is just, it will flow. So that's actually would be the answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Now, what's in store for the next 12 months for you?
Yeah, great question. So we've probably touched on that before. So just, having a space where clients can kind of get everything, because we know movement's one part, and generally when I work with people, it's on a movement immersion level. So creating a space where we can start to have conversations about nutrition, psychology, blood work, so nutrition, psychology, blood work, vitamins and minerals, and movement. So the next 12 months is really focused on, giving a client some kind of clarity on how to link everything up full circle. And that's what we started to create. Mm-hmm. And that would basically be it. So we want to create a space where people kind of have the full picture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you talk about the wheel of life, when it comes to a full transformation, there's all these sort of quadrants that you need to address that will give you the result, and also put you in a place where you not only did you get the result you wanted, but you did it in the best possible way.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is teaching people about nutrition, vitamins, minerals, blood work, psychology, and training. So they're all the variables that make up a long-term transformation.
Yeah.
And just creating a space where that's perceived.
Awesome. And finally, where can people get in contact and follow you? Where's the best?
So the best way is Instagram. It's just Jackson_Litchfield. And DM's the best way at the moment. My website's actually down. We're just revamping the images and adding a few things, which should be up in the next couple of months. So that would be jacksonlitchfield.com.
Okay.
And that should be up pretty soon. But right now, Instagram's the best way. And a lot of my theories are on there and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll put links to that on the show notes. But finally, just want to acknowledge you and thank you for your time coming in today. It's been a good excuse to sit down and catch up and shoot the breeze.
Yeah, well, thank you, Cabo. It's always good to be here in this prestigious house of yours. So.